We had a work. I work in East Palo Alto, so traffic was a little scary. So, where'd Dean go?
Bathroom.
He must really trust me, so you can tell me anything about Dean right now.
His wife's desserts are fabulous.
I'm not going to remember them, but I'd love to hear your names. And maybe by the end of the time, I'll be almost there. So just tell me your name and sort of what context you're in, if you're just purely a student or you're working full time or you're in ministry already, and just so I sort of know who's in the room. So we'll start at back because we usually start at front.
Okay, Sam Musgrave. I'm a full-time student here in my MDiv, earning my MDiv, and serve as the high school director at Campus Bible Church in Fresno.
And so you travel all the way over here from Fresno?
Along with Chapman right here and Lee way over there.
Wow, you guys are so.
Just to hear you, John.
That's pretty awesome. H. Spies, you know H?
I'm sorry?
You know a man named H.
Yeah,
Spies?
well, I don't know him personally, but he's got a very good reputation. Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine.
He's a healer. The guy, wherever he goes,
Yep.
things get better.
Yeah, he's a guy I was trying to hook you up with. He didn't hear me.
Yeah.
So H has been a friend and a sort of a mentor of mine for
Cool.
a couple of years now.
Right on. Yeah, he's a good guy. I actually was supposed to meet him a couple weeks ago, but things fell through. He got busy with another arrangement, and I'll end up having the honor of meeting him.
You know Phil Sky?
Phil Scott.
Yes.
The name rings
You
a
know
bell
Phil?
big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, Phil and Reese. They're also good friends.
He's
of mine.
our speaker at our winter camp over here.
Got a lot of good people in Fresno.
Huh.
So, Chapman was it?
Yeah, Chapman Hutchins. I'm also from Fresno, earning my MDiv.
Nice.
So I'm a full-time student here, working part-time, I guess. Actually, as a custodian for campus.
So you're like his custodian, or?
Yeah. And right now just serving as the leader for the college worship ministry.
So you all like just drive here on one day a week, or you stay every night, or how?
We drive in on Sunday,
Okay.
stay at Dr. Tuck's house
Nice.
typically, and then we'll come to class all day Monday and head back after class is over tonight.
That's impressive.
My name's Chuck, and I'm a lay leader at a relatively young church plant in Fremont. We're about a year old, and I'm a part-time student, and I work in an electronics firm in the area, but come to school part-time. So,
Great.
yeah.
Noel, I'm a full-time student in MDiv program and serving in a international student and young adults fellowship in Chinese School Christchurch.
Nice. Very good.
My name's Matt. I'm a full-time student at MDiv. I also serve as the small group pastor for the college ministry over at Venture Christian Church.
Great.
I'm Catherine Obermeyer, and I am a full-time student getting my master's in ministry and leadership. And let's see, I'm the head of women's ministry at Westgate Church, but for the young adults.
Cool.
I'm Pura, and I work here at Western as part of the admissions and enrollment team, and I lead worship up in San Francisco at my church called New Life.
New life.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Mack. I take classes part-time. I am in the deacon board at my church. It's a Chinese church in Fremont,
Okay.
and I lead worship. I work full-time at Oracle.
Wow.
I'm Dean.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tim, and I'm a dual major here at Western in MDiv and marriage and family therapy.
Wow.
I'm coming to school full time, but I'm also raising 4 special needs kids, and I'm preaching and teaching part time at a couple of different churches.
Do you need anything else to do?
It's been kind of crazy. Well, the last month has been really hard because we're in transition on the 4th child, because he went to a failed placement, and now we're like visiting him 3 times a week, and that's really really killing our schedule.
Yeah.
But
So how many special needs kids do you have?
well, he'll be the 4th.
4th one. Plus 4 special needs kids in the home, John.
I heard that.
Jeez.
Wow.
Wow.
My name's Lee. Along with these two, I'm also working on my MDiv, and I am the recently appointed junior high director at Campus 5.
Love junior high ministry.
Gotta love it.
You don't know how great it is until you don't do it anymore. I always thought I did junior high ministry with Youth for Christ in the Central Valley in Modesto, and I always thought I was like the stepchild of the ministry, and now I'm further away from that. I'm like, gosh, that was like the glory years. Those kids would do anything, and they think you're the greatest thing in the world, and they'll do anything. So junior high ministry is awesome. So sometimes I have dreams of quitting it all and going back to junior high ministry. So, well, as Dean said, my name is John, and I'm the CEO of a small nonprofit in East Palo Alto called Northern California Urban Development. And we've been in the community for, the nonprofit started in 2004-05, primarily with a very broad mission to address issues of systemic and generational poverty. What that's looked like is a credit union project. It looked like a youth program that we just started called Future Profits, which teaches under-resourced kids life skills, financial literacy, and decision-making skills. And we serve about 300 kids a week, primarily in the school systems. And we just wrote our own curriculum last year, and it's published in venues all over the nation. And that's been a real great program. We also have a housing program dealing with the foreclosure crisis. And in East Palo Alto, similar to in the Valley, you guys have seen it too. We've seen out of 6,000 single-family homes in our community, 1,000 either have been in foreclosure or going to foreclosure. So we've seen a massive shift of wealth from working class, primarily African American and Hispanic, to being outside investors coming in and snapping up properties. And so we're seeing a real seismic shift in the community because of the foreclosure crisis. So we're doing a couple things in that regard. We're working on doing foreclosure counseling and trying to keep people in their homes by renegotiating mortgages with their banks. And then we also we're also in the process of kicking off an acquisition project where we buy foreclosed homes and then put them back into the community through a land trust. And it's a big thing, but a shared equity vehicle really, where we can retain the value of the homes for the community and the community. So that's kind of the stuff that I've been doing lately. I'm also an ordained pastor, actually in two places, from Highway and then through the Church of God in Christ, which is primarily an African American denomination. So I used to be a black pastor. So although about a year and a half ago we stepped back from being in leadership in the African American church and went back to Highway. Initially, when my wife and I moved to East Palo Alto in 2000, we landed very quickly at Highway. And it was a great place. And then Dean sent me out to church plant, and there's a whole story around that. I might get into it in some of this tonight. And but now we're really happy to be back at Highway in a safe place for us, especially in this time, because we're doing so many other things in the kind of the arena of economic development. So and I'll just say that you could not, and he gets all like weird when I say this stuff. You could not have a better professor. I've been in ministry. This is probably my I've been married 23 years, so I'm my 24th year in ministry now. And we have never been pastored by anybody except for Dean. Now, we've had good pastors and good people so in our lives and good mentors from afar, and I'll talk about some of them, but Dean is a pastor's pastor, and he's just been a phenomenal blessing to my wife and I. My wife also works in the ministry. She is a caseworker for a ministry called New Creation Home, and they do take in teen moms and pregnant parenting teens, and so it's a very intense time. Melissa went through a real difficult season. Dean stepped up through the church and helped her get some counseling and work through some stuff. I mean, we've just never had anybody that's so in us like that. So I just really appreciate Highway and appreciate Dean's leadership.
I asked you to remember all that with the evaluations tonight.
Yeah, see, I told you he gets nervous when you say something. I'm also blessed to be on the board of directors for an organization called the Christian Community Development Association, founded by Dr. John Perkins. And out of that, I'm actually on the executive committee dealing with the issue of emerging leaders and leadership development within the association. So I'm just really blessed to be here with you all. And at the end of the day, I'm really, I'm not a theoretician as much as I am a practitioner in the community. And I'm just here. I just have to offer you what I have, which is 24 years in the trenches. And many of you will go much further than I ever will, and do greater things than I ever will, which is, praise the Lord, is great. So let's just kind of conspire together and talk about leadership, because, you know, we're going to use Clinton as a model, and let's just sort of kind of work through this together tonight and have it be real interactive. Because I don't want to stand up here and just lecture, because it's not. We need to hear each other, not just you need to hear me. So, amen?
Mm-hmm.
I am a black preacher, so I need an amen every once in a while. So that would be helpful. So I want to start out with the scripture. Dean, what is our time? What time do I need to be done?
You know, this class is our last one. We're kind of, you can
Burned
take
out.
as much time as you. No, really. I mean, if you want to take, we'll take a break at some point, but we're just going to be kind of tying things up at the end, so we're pretty loose on time. So.
Okay.
Just go until.
He just told a black preacher to be loose on time. Did you
Well,
understand what he just said?
So let's go at least till like 7:30 maybe.
Okay.
Well, after, and then
Yeah,
we'll evaluate.
we should be done by that.
Okay.
I want to start out in 1 Timothy 3, and very very familiar passage. I want to couch our conversation by talking about, you know, Paul's vision of leadership and his exhortation to Timothy. I'm reading out of the New Living. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. So this is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be an elder, he desires an honorable position. So an elder must be a man or woman whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, and have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? An elder must not be a new believer, because he might become proud, and the devil would cause him to fail. Also, people outside of the church must speak well of him, so that he will not be disgraced and fall into the devil's trap. In the same way, deacons must be well respected and have integrity. They must not be heavy drinkers or dishonest with money. They must be committed to the mystery of the faith now revealed, and must live with a clear conscience. Before they are appointed as deacons, let them be closely examined. If they pass the test, then let them serve as deacons. In the same way, their wives must be respected and not slander others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. A deacon must be faithful to his wife, and he must manage his children and household well. Those who do well as deacons will be rewarded with respect from others and have increased confidence in their faith in Christ Jesus. What are some of the things that stand out to you in this?
From a big picture perspective, character counts.
Character counts. Somebody else?
I mean, it's more what he does on top of that. That is about character, as opposed to credentials or experience or a lot of different things. More popularity.
I think to Tim's point, right, as in a leadership class, and we're learning about all these things great leaders do, the most prominent thing here is their character.
Right.
You know, not their leadership skills, not whether they're proven worthy as, you know, tried and true tested leaders.
Right.
It's the godly character within, right, and how they live that out in their practical daily lives and in their just different spheres as well, the family, the work,
Right.
Community, and so those are some interesting points.
Good.
I see that family is very important.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of sober in both of them gives the mind, leaves the impression of consistency. They're reliable. They're clear-headed and alert.
Mm-hmm. I was struck by this. The mystery of faith now revealed must live with a clear conscience, verse 9. A clear conscience. Sometimes as you get older, clear consciences are harder to come by.
in verse 10, if they pass the test, that can be easily overlooked also.
Yeah, it's true. So how do you live this out in the context of the American church culture, where performance matters? Because I'm not sure that this is what I see as the paradigm of great leadership in the American church, or in the Western church.
Well, I know that earlier, we fleshed out somewhat how, the church over the last decade or two has kind of gone through a change, right? Trying to model themselves, many churches at least, trying to model themselves after, the business model, right? And that's not really necessarily what we see here, although it can be somewhat reminiscent, I suppose, to some leader or level 5 qualities, but nonetheless, I still go back to what we've already discussed. I mean, the character of the person, at least as it leads God's church, is the most important.
It seems like it doesn't matter what religion comes to America, it gets changed by American culture. And so the values of the culture are not these values, even though we say it's all about the Lord Jesus and embodying Christ formed in us and so forth. But then it comes into power and different definitions of success that aren't really biblical at all.
I mean, I think if when you're looking for maybe to fill a pastoral position or leadership position in the church, we don't necessarily come to this set of criteria, right? I mean, it's the experience that they've had before, right? It's proven leadership capabilities, not based on these typically, right? And so, why is that? I mean, right? Why is that?
In kind of the spirit that I minister in urban communities, there's such a dearth and desperate need for leaders that there's almost this tension to push people forward if they have any sort of inkling of ability. And even in the organization, like in CCDA, there's a big fight right now because we have this emerging leaders cohort program that I lead, where we identify like 25 leaders from around the country to journey with some of the founders of the organization. It's a great thing, but we struggle to find leaders of color. So there's this tension of, okay, we got to get leaders of color into this cohort program, and this is the fight back and forth of, how do you deal with the lack of experience, maybe the lack of proven character, not maybe the lack of a resume, but also lack of really solid references, while still wanting to honor diversity and leadership and bring people into. And this is a tension. So let's flip over to chapter 4. And I want to just take a moment and just reflect on Paul's his encouragement to Timothy himself, specifically as a leader. So we'll start in verse 6. If you explain these things to the brothers and sisters, Timothy, you will be a worthy servant of Christ Jesus, one who is nourished by the message of faith and the good teaching you have followed. Do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourself to be godly. Physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and the life to come. This is a trustworthy saying, and everyone should accept it. This is why we work so hard and continue to struggle, for our hope is in the living God, who is the Savior of all people, and particularly of all believers. Teach these things and insist that everyone learn them. Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young, but be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. Until I get there, focus on reading the scriptures to the church, encouraging the believers and teaching them. Do not neglect the spiritual gift you received through the prophecy spoken over you when the elders of the church laid their hands on you. Give your complete attention to these matters. Throw yourself into the task so that everyone will see your progress. Keep a close watch on how you live and on your teaching. Stay true to what is right for the sake of your own salvation and the salvation of those who hear you. So what jumps out to you there?
Scripture and sound doctrine.
Say it again.
The scripture and sound doctrine to stay grounded and not allow yourself to stray from it.
Pay close attention to yourselves. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we leaders, we get in trouble because we don't. We just don't. We just get caught up in the flow. All the stuff we're trying to get done all the time.
You know, it makes a strong contrast between irreverence, silliness, and godliness. You know, you stick to the word. Times are constantly going to be changing.
Yeah.
You know, stick to the word, where the Spirit's leading, and you know, be true to that.
Yeah. I love the fact that Paul, there's the admonition of him to sort of, it's okay that you're young. Remember who you are. I mean, I'm sensing Paul saying, there's going to be some tough times. First thing, remember who you are. Stay true to the fundamentals. And I love that. Do not neglect the spiritual gift you received through the prophecy spoken over you. I love the fact that Paul brings him back to the point where he was called and the word of God that came over his life. And and the fact that there's the vision that God cast for Timothy that he needed to be reminded of in the middle of the struggle and sort of the work of the ministry. And I think that there's a little bit of a both. It's the hard work of character and remembering the anointing and the call of God at the same time. Because in ministry it's so hard to you get so bogged down in the stress. Some of the things that Dean was talking about when I walked in the door. That if I don't go back to that, like God called me, and God spoke over my life when I was a young man, and then a couple other times since then. I mean, that audible, in some sense, call of God. I don't know that I'd be standing here 20 plus years later. And I love that that Paul sort of brings that into the backside of this. What are some of the words that were spoke over your life that confirmed your call to leadership? And it could be like a mystical thing. If you're Pentecostal like me, you got this like, thus saith the Lord. But if you're not, it's like God said, got this scripture, So let's give a little bit of a grace for different denominational viewpoints here. But what is the word of God what is the word of the Lord that was spoken over your life that caused you to sit in the seat that you're in right now? Go ahead.
When I was in high school, I quite frankly, I don't believe that I was saved at the time, but people thought I was, and it was, in a sense, it was really prophetic in a way. I had a lot of people praying for me and stuff. Was a great kid, and impressed a lot of people, but I know for a fact, like inside, God wasn't my delight. It was
sure.
the applause of men, and but it was just that God was almost like forcing me towards this way, and through ministry kind of broke me down. I feel like I had no choice in the matter. It was pretty interesting, but it was over and over again, just people kind of, hey, you belong in ministry, which probably lacking discernment on a lot of people's part, but nonetheless God's hand was graciously working through it. It's pretty amazing to look back over.
Amen. Anybody else?
I was a teacher for 5 years in junior high and high school, and I loved it. I just hated correcting papers. And I just loved teaching the word in every subject that I had. And even, it was a private Christian school, but even the Bible class was so dry compared to teaching the word in other contexts. in history, in music, in literature, whatever it was. So that was good training ground. I feel like that was probably a great time. It's a different kind of youth ministry. I did get involved with youth ministry at the church as well, but I felt like I had done music, and I didn't get as much joy there as when I'm in a Bible study and just opening up the Word with each other. And people were starting to confirm that, saying, this is what you got to do. But I'm coming from a family that parents didn't encourage teaching, let alone not even ministry. But near the end of my mom's life, she passed away in 2006. She saw and confirmed and kind of came back to the Lord in her life and said, you need to go to seminary. Go.
Sure.
That was huge.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage you, get alone with the Lord and remember, those stones of remembrance that the Old Testament talks about. Remember, the call in your life that God has placed on your life, because sometimes the call is all you got. Sometimes in the middle of all the struggle, the call is all you've got left, and that calling has to be sure. That prophecy that that Paul is encouraging Timothy has got to be there in your life, and just fortify that call and that foundation in your life, because that's the essence of where all this comes from, and the strength that you're going to draw from as a leader sometimes in some of the tough times. So, well, let's move on and let's talk a little bit about this book. Hopefully, this book was worth it for you. What we're going to do is, so the class description, which I'll just throw in here, is personal leadership transition can be one of the most stressful and challenging seasons of a leader's life. Using Clinton's 6 stages of leadership development as a foundation, we'll discuss the phases and steps in development of your life. It will examine the strategies for finding success amid new challenges and staying centered when things are changing. The one thing you know about leadership is that it's always going to be different and it's always going to change. And that God has a process for your life that He will bring you through. And I know that God is sovereign over all, and He can move you from one stage of leadership development to another. He'll do what God wants to do. But by and large, I think what Clinton is laying forth here is a very true progression that God brings leaders through. And it's good to know. It's good to know what the progression is, because when you're in it, it helps you understand what God is doing in your life. During the time, it's almost like I'm just going through this thing with this guy that I'm going back to some personality tests that remind me, sort of knowing who I am helps me be who I can be, so that I understand sort of what drives me. And this is kind of what I see this as understanding in some ways what the what the process that God will use to bring you into greater levels of leadership. Some overarching thoughts that leadership is a calling and a choice. That you don't have to be a leader. You can choose not to be a leader. And all are gifted in leadership in one way or another. But I believe that God has certain calls on our lives and a destiny for our life that He designs. But we have to choose to walk in it. Character is paramount. We talked about that before. Ministry flows out of being and not doing. And in ministry, you will be called to do. And we give lots of lip service to the BBB. But in reality, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're being who you need to be. And for the most part, unless you come across a great pastor like Dean, you're gonna be judged by what you do and not so much what you are, who you are. So, but ministry, true anointed, power of God, anointing of God falling, revival happening, lives being changed ministry ultimately flows out of who you are and not what you do. We were talking about, and you'll deal, this, we deal a lot with changes in leadership and struggles and conflicts, and we'll talk more about conflict at the end of this. Ultimately, who we are will come out in the wash. People will know and judge us by our fruit, and our fruit and who we are will be eventually revealed. So it behooves you and I both, and I fail every day, but it behooves us to really focus on who we are and watch our life and doctrine closely, as Paul encourages Timothy. God is sovereign. Generalizations are just that. God does what He wants to do when He wants to do it. So we'll give God the ability to do whatever He wants. So Clinton talks about these different phases and boundary events in a person in a leadership development life. So I talk very fast, by the way. I'm from New Jersey originally. So if I start rambling and going fast, just stop and ask a question, okay? There are certain process items that help bring about a shift in direction. And these process items can include a lot of different things. A promotion, a crisis, a new ministry opportunity, learning a new concept that just like rocks your world, and you have to just develop this new concept, unusual experiences, life-changing encounters with a person like Dean, or Jesus himself, divine guidance, lots of things that God can use to really be these process items that bring about a shift and a change of direction. So there's different kinds of process items that occur in different times, in different phases. So the early phases are primarily dealing with inner life growth. It's about who you are and the foundations of your life that God is doing. The middle phases display lessons regarding ministry and sort of the journeyman phase, I like to call it, of ministry. And the later phases are sort of the glory times. So God uses events, people, and circumstances to develop a leader. God uses events, people, and circumstances to develop you as a leader and as a person. And a lot of times we see these circumstances as negatives, and they feel like negatives, and they're painful, and they hurt. But these are the things that God uses to test our mettle and to turn us into better leaders. And I am going through this right now. We'll talk more about that. So, Clinton's generalized timeline. So phase 1 is sovereign foundations. Phase 2 is inner life growth. Phase 3 is ministry maturing. Phase 4 is life maturing. Phase 5 is convergence. And phase 6 is afterglow. Sovereign foundations. So, in phase 1, God works through outside events, family, environment, historical events, to do his work in our life. This is that whole prevenient grace piece where God pursues us to come into a relationship with him. It begins at birth. God picks us out at he knit us together in our mother's womb. I was reflecting on Psalm 139 today. And how he sovereignly chooses us and makes us who we are. And that's part of that sovereign foundation that God does. A leader has very little control over what happens during this time. So God was doing stuff in your life long before you ever knew he was doing something, and you had no control of it at all. And there's a task to do then, which is that basic task of learning to respond positively and to take advantage of what God has laid in these foundations. This is when you're in Sunday school and you didn't choose to go to Sunday school, you got stuck in Sunday school, and God's doing something in Sunday school in your life. This is when your parents are reading about Jonah and the whale, and God is teaching you things through these stories. These are the very sovereign foundations. This is about life experiences that could happen if you didn't come from a Christian home, and that there's things you're picking up and God moving in your life and positioning you so that you can encounter him in his glory and come to Christ and walk in that way. Phase 2 is inner life growth. So it's where a leader seeks to know God in a more personal manner, where he or she learns the importance of praying and hearing God. And as he or she grows, crucial testing begins to happen, and a leader gets involved in some type of ministry. Now this could happen. I mean, for me, this started beginning in junior high, when I landed in a good church. I grew up Catholic. My parents accepted Christ during what was called the Catholic Charismatic Movement, where all these crazy Catholics started speaking in tongues and stuff started happening. And there was a great revival, and this is in the 70s. But I wasn't feeling the Catholic Church, so I landed in the Assembly of God as a junior high kid and really found Christ there. And they very quickly, I was a deacon for the junior high ministry as a junior higher. And this is really where God began to do his work. And testing started to happen because I was really good looking, and that wasn't true. But this is where I started to get my feet wet in ministry, and some things started to happen. And I started learning about prayer. God was so sovereign to put me into a Pentecostal church because they're talking about praying all the time and reading the Bible. And now I've shrugged off some of the legalism of that background. But during that time, God was teaching me some crucial things that have come with me even to this day. About tapping into the power of God, and about the power of worship, and about how spiritual warfare is real and the enemy will attack you, and all these things that really, even to this day are so important. But the primary task during this phase is character growth. It's building character, and it's building that foundation that God is doing in your life. And phase 3 is ministry maturing. This is where the leader begins to reach out to others, where there's spiritual gift discernment. where you start to understand the giftings that God has given you. If you're an evangelist, if you have the gift of helps, and that you understand in a deeper way sort of who God has made you to be and what He's called you to do. Training occurs. This is where you start going to Bible school, perhaps even seminary, and you receive sort of a training on what a leader is and how to lead. And the leader gains a better understanding of relationships. So the development task during this is that relationships with others and the inadequacies of his or her own personal life. So during this time, during this phase, you figure that relationships are key, and that interpersonal relationships are really central to your effectiveness in ministry. And you begin to understand what you're good at and what you're really bad at, and the inadequacies that exist in your own life, and how you need to overcome those inadequacies to grow as a leader. Ministry or activity or fruitfulness is not the focus of phases 1, 2, or 3. So many times in our lives, we want to become an effective leader, a leader that has all this great, all these great numbers and all the pressure to do that. But primarily, what God is doing in your life during this time is really that sovereign foundation. I remember when, so we were in. I went into the ministry really early. I joined an organization called Youth of the Mission, or YWAM, right out of high school, and landed. We spent about 7 years in YWAM. I met my wife while we were working with teenage prostitutes in Hollywood. She wasn't a prostitute. We were ministering together in Hollywood. I got married really early, and there was all this pressure. But very early on, we had a lot of success. We pioneered a ministry on the border in Mexico that grew to be one of the largest, short-term missions receiving organizations, at least in the Western U.S. We were seeing a couple thousand kids come through a year at the time. This was in the early '90s, and then all of a sudden, I get yanked out of that, and we got burned out. We were dealing with major staff issues. A staff member tried to commit suicide. I had the daughter of a staff member who was molested by another staff member. I had staff members who were sleeping together, and I was a 25-year-old guy trying to deal with just massive life things, and it just became way too much, and God yanked us out of that and planted us in the Central Valley. Now, I was called to do urban ministry. When I was 18 years old in New York City, it was one of those sovereign moments where I really felt the confirmation of the call of God to minister in the streets. And after this time in Mexico, God puts us in Escalon, California. Anybody been to Escalon? It is literally a cow town. There are more cows in Escalon than there are people. It's a Portuguese dairy community. It's Portuguese and it's Dutch and Portuguese. That's what it is. And I did not know what God was doing. I started leading a junior high youth ministry to skater kids in Escalon, California, and my call was urban ministry. But this is what God was doing. He was relaying a foundation or strengthening a foundation that had begun years ago in a junior high ministry in Florida, and bringing me back to the place of where the foundation was being strengthened. I was focused on. I felt like God had completely turned His back on me. I felt like I had been washed up and kicked out and thrown away because I was stuck in this little cow town. But God was doing a work in Melissa in my life that I would not be standing in front of you right now if it wasn't for the work that He was doing then. What we think sometimes is God sending us to the backwater is actually God doing a phenomenal work in our life that we have yet to see the fruit, how that's going to come to fruition. It's those times of doing junior high youth ministry, reading Dan Kimball's books and reading all these books, and where I learned some of the very basics of ministry that I carry with me today. There's a concept of doing what you have to do so that you get to do what you want to do or are gifted to do. And in the development of leadership, sometimes we have to do things that seem like are completely outside of our gift, and perhaps really are outside of our gift mix. But part of leadership is learning to do what you have to do. And then when we pass those tests, God will let us do what we want to do. And the funny thing is that at least I found that I always end up circling back to that again. I mean, I don't like to do half of the stuff I do. But I do the stuff that I have to do so I get to do the stuff that I want to do. In this phase, God is working in the leader and not through the leader. You know, again, the church, we're so focused on the effectiveness and how many salvations and how many decisions for Christ that we had, and how many people, you know, are in our youth groups, and how many people are in our women's ministries, and how many people are doing all these things. But as you develop as a leader and as you develop other leaders, remember that these phases are times for foundation, not necessarily for effectiveness, although God may still be effective in the middle of that. We put so much pressure on the leaders that we develop as pastors to be effective in what they do right now. Any comments, questions, thoughts?
Well, just one thing. I mean, the issue a lot of times is we'll become familiar with some outstanding leader who does amazing things when they're not, like a Bill Hybels or something, right? It's like, okay. But one senior pastor said that I worked under said something really wise to me. He said basically this. He said, Dean, he said, just make sure that whatever else happens when you're, when you're 40 years old, you're in the right ministry. Yeah. That's when it's going to start to happen. You've already made some mistakes and learned some things, but you're still young enough to where you have the energy. And he goes, that'll be a prime time. So just wherever else you work and so forth. And to me, that was a kind of this. And a kind of an indication of this kind of a process. It's like, it's important to do, and so forth, but, you look sometimes at the really great leaders, they had really short, they were just moments in times, or maybe even a smaller part of their overall ministry life, that they had amazing effectiveness. Right. And there's somehow there's just a convergence at points, so.
Other thoughts?
Would you see youth ministry as more of a transition time for leaders, as in equipping, as in a training stage, as opposed to, unless someone's absolutely called to high school ministry forever, and as opposed to like a stepping stone, something else?
I have a hard time one of my heroes is a guy named Marvin Jacobo in Modesto. He works for Youth for Christ now. He was a youth pastor of First Baptist in Modesto. And he's 50, well, he's at least 10 years older, so he's 52, 53. He's still doing youth ministry. I think he would balk at that comment. I know you kind of qualified it, but I think it's dangerous when we think of youth ministry as just a proving ground, because I think it shortchanges the kids. But I think also that God will use circumstances. I mean, it could be homeless ministry too. And I think that there are phases in your life where you're placed in. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a hard question. As a long-term youth ministry, I have a hard time saying, yeah, it's just the minor leagues, because I don't think it's the minor leagues. But there's development that happens there.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dean?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem in youth ministry for so long has been people who are just looking at it as a stepping stone, looking past it.
Yeah.
And so, right now, we have a youth leader, we have a director, Lisa, who this is it for her, and I hope that she stays with it. I think there's a crying need for people to look to youth ministry as I agree.
As an end.
Yeah. But it's also an important thing for. There's going to be a lot of us. I mean, I did youth ministry, and the Lord moved me. There's nothing wrong with that, but I mean, there's just so much ministry to be done there that you can just look at and see how you have a chance to shape a person for life with that. So.
For those of you who feel like you've sort of been through these three phases, I mean, has this been true in your life? So have you seen either this happen in your life, or do you feel like you're sort of in phase 2 or phase 3? And you see sort of God working in that way?
I mean, I see all of them having happened, but my case is a little bit different because You know, I became a Christian and was, you know, spiritually stalled for like 30 years. But, I mean, I was in constantly demanding circumstances and leadership roles, and so I developed a lot of that over here, and then the spiritual maturity came over here, and but it all came together in this
Sure.
way, but it just wasn't, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4 like
Sure.
he was in.
Okay, let's move on. So phase 4, life maturing. This phase tends to be where the leader has identified and begins using his or her gifts, where a sense of priorities in your ministry is developed, where you know sort of what is most important to you and what you know what that unique gift that you have for the body is and how it fits into your life. Where mature fruitfulness is beginning to result, where you see fruitful ministry being developed, and it's flowing and it's natural, and it begins to it just is. Ministry flows out of being, has significance, where you know we begin to understand that our soul care is as important as the way we get up and preach on Sunday or counsel, and that you know there's that sort of checking back in with our being, and there's a natural tendency to sort of take your own temperature. Isolation, conflict, and crisis has a new significance. Those are 3 words that every leader will know intimately. You can't get away from the feeling of isolation and the fact that you're just pretty much on your own, or you feel like you're on your own, and you're out in front. That conflict is inevitable in ministry because you're dealing with people's lives, and many times we're called to call out the inadequacies in their lives from a place of brokenness in our own. And that conflict will just be a part of what we do, and that crisis in ministry will always be coming. We're always the first ones called to a crisis. We're always the first one that's called when there's a marriage that breaks up, or that, you know, or there's crisis on staff because we're dealing with broken people, and that broken people, you know, hurt people. That the leader's experiential understanding of God is developed, and that we sort of understand God in this life way, that we live and experience Him, and understand the nature of God and the presence of God in a whole different way. The task during this phase is to positively respond to the experiences that God ordains. We'll come back to some of the crisis issues. Phase 5 is convergence, where God moves a leader into a role that matches his or her gift mix and experience, and that the leader uses the best he or she has to offer and is free from ministry for which he or she is not gifted or suited. So this is where you're beginning to arrive, and that you've proven yourself, that your character has been developed to a point where you get to do really what you want to do, what you're gifted to do, and what you're primarily called to do, that you're removed from some of the mundaneness of things that aren't necessarily the call that God has in your life. And the task here is to respond to God's guidance. The response to God's guidance must be to trust, rest, and watch as God moves you into a ministry that embodies all the development of the preceding phases. Convergence manifests itself as you respond to God's work in your life. So, and finally, there's afterglow, where the fruit of a lifetime of ministry and growth culminates into an era of recognition and indirect influence at broad levels. Leaders have built upon a lifetime of contacts and can exert influence. Very few reach this level. Very few actually reach to this point. There's only one person I personally know who's reached afterglow. That's many of you probably don't know him, but John Perkins is one of my heroes. African American, 80-year-old civil rights leader, wrote some phenomenal books, was a counselor to President Reagan, and I'm honored. I was with him last month, and he's the only person I met in person that's actually at this phase. He can pick up the phone and call Jesse Jackson and say, Jesse, here's what I think you should do. He was just, along with Robert Schuller and a number of other national, and Jack Hayford, a number of other leaders, they just did a video called The Faith of Our Fathers, where they got these 70, 80-year-old leaders into a room and just let them talk. And so he runs in that circle. And it's a beautiful thing to watch, because he finds a way to sort of walk into a room and control the room, but not in a way that's sort of overbearing. His presence is manifested in our board of directors is like 30 people. He just walks in and sits down, doesn't say a whole lot, but when he speaks, it's like the Word of God speaking. So I would say that Billy Graham, was at this place when he was still sort of actively ministering. Men like, men and women out there who are doing this. But very few reach the afterglow phase. Very few can actually go through all these 5 different levels of leadership and reach a point where they can exert that kind of influence. And the challenge before you and I is whether or not we'll let God do His work in our life to a point where we can reach that phase of ministry in our life, and we can be that effective. So, let's talk a little bit about isolation. So isolation is when a leader is separated from normal involvement, and usually for an extended time. He or she experiences some aspect of relationship to God in a new or deeper way. God uses this to teach important lessons that could not be learned while experiences the pressures of normal ministry. How many of you, has any of you experienced this isolation before in your ministry?
What do you mean for an extended time?
Well, that could be undefined. Some of that depends on where it is. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years. Paul certainly felt that when he went out and was under the training.
Sure.
And we'll talk about Paul in a minute. Jesus felt it when Jesus went in the desert. Now, obviously it wasn't for years, but go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking back in my college years when a lot of the friends who they reached out to me in high school and they kind of walked away from God. We went to different schools, but also thinking about they would have their Friday nights and I'd be serving at the church. I'd be coming back from San Jose and had a rehearsal for some music thing, and they'd be out partying, and it just felt like, what's going on here? These are the guys who gave me my Bible.
Right.
These are the guys who I wanted to be like, and there was a certain separation there.
Sure.
Don't know where they are now necessarily, but I think that there's a huge question asking times of
right.
Why am I here and they're gone?
Right. There will come a time in your leadership where you're going to feel isolated, and that you'll be in some ways separated away from the norm, and God will do a work in your life that'll be profound and deep. But it will come, and I know that sounds really grim, and it feels grim when you're in it. But the truth is that it is the work of God in a way that you'll never understand, in a way that He lays sovereign foundations in a way that He can't when you're in the middle of the fray. And this could be, this could be a sabbatical. It could be a planned isolation, where you step away from, your ministry for a season and receive some training, or just, hang out like a bear in the woods. But isolation is by and large, it is one of the tools that God will use in a leader's life. It's tough for extroverts, because it's tough for extroverts, but it's something that God does, and He used it in Paul's life, and you can just go through the litany of great leaders in the Bible and see where God has brought them away from the fray for a season to learn intimacy with Him in a way that they've never experienced before. Dean, does that happen to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was
I
it
mean,
Hammett?
sometimes.
Hammett, was that for you?
Well, for 3 years, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of that was the death of a dream for me.
Yeah.
So for 3 years, and I didn't. So I'm 27 years old. I'm in this retirement community, but the Lord didn't lift His hand. He kept us there, and that has been the formative wilderness experience for Diane and me, honestly.
What do you think you learned out of that?
I learned a lot of things out of that. I learned some kind of very practical things. I learned that I need to be in an urban setting, in a suburban setting like this one. That was really an exurb that was a whole different, I mean, it was like a cross-cultural experience. And I need to be on a multiple staff. That was a big thing for me too. I need people around me. But I also learned that, you know, I wasn't omni-gifted and I couldn't just make things happen. But I stunk in Hemet. I did, spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah, when we were in Escalon, this was a deep, lonely time for me. I think about it now a lot, about how I felt like I mean, we loved the ministry we were involved with in Wyoming. We loved it. I mean, it was, and all of a sudden we were just gone and stuck in this town. And I'm going, Lord, what have you done? And you know, why have you placed me here? And it was. I mean, I literally, I know you're going to be playing the harmonica or the violin, but I didn't have any friends. You know, I had few friends. I had, you know, few outlets to go and sort of just be myself. God really placed me in an isolated, lonely place. Out of that, just amazing things happened years later. Boy, that was a tough couple of years. God did some great things. Some kids came to Christ. I mean, there's some young people that are serving the Lord right now that we sort of played a role in helping develop. So it wasn't that God was just not doing anything during that time. But boy, it was a lonely, isolated time. And you know, and there's been other times that have been much shorter in duration that have come around at different phases in life. But isolation is it's a wonderful, beautiful, wondrous tool that God uses. And, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the Apostle Paul and see if some of these line up. So what I've done is I've laid out Paul's basic life, and I put what I believe are sort of some of those boundary moments in his life that he did. So sovereign foundation. So Paul was born, depending on who you talk to, some say AD 2. He removed to Jerusalem around AD 1215, and he went to rabbinical school under Gamaliel, you know, the famous Gamaliel who came to prominence in Acts. And probably the key moment in this sovereign foundation before he even knew Christ was the witnessing of the stoning of Stephen in AD 32. Now, some say that Paul would absolutely have been at the crucifixion, because how could you be sort of being a Pharisee and not be at the crucifixion of Christ? So I would imagine even that Paul witnessed that whole, you know, the passion of Christ and everything that happened during that time. But I think it culminated really at the stoning of Stephen, where something really began to change in his life in AD 32. In AD 33, we believe there was his conversion, and he flees to Arabia for training. Here goes the isolation, almost out the gate. He was isolated for 3 whole years in Arabia for training. Then he comes back to Damascus and he meets Barnabas, and he spends some time in Tarsus for 4 years. Do you see the blocks of time? We read the New Testament and we think it all happens like this, like turning a page. But all of a sudden we're looking at 3 years, 4 years. I mean, there's a lot that's going on, and it's taken a long time, and it's not as quick as we perceive it to be. God is doing this amazing work in the apostles' life over years, not just days, over years. So he's in Tarsus from 36 to 40. He's in Antioch in AD 41, which became a seminal place in his life, and really one of the sort of the parts that the foundations of his ministry. And he meets Barnabas in AD 40 and 41 and develops that relationship. We would say that the relationship with Barnabas really was another boundary event, because that was a key relationship. Remember, the inner life growth, one of the things that happens is God brings these key, important relationships into your life that really play a role in developing you in ways that wouldn't have happened if they weren't there. So we see ministry maturing. So Paul has his first missionary journey from AD 44 to 46, and he's in Antioch again from AD 46 to 49. Again, long periods of time where God was doing some amazing things. And then the crisis event happens, which was the conflict with John Mark. And so you see that God uses in this time, well, all of our times, but really specifically in the ministry maturing time and the life maturing time, God uses these crises, these conflict events to really develop our character and to really reveal who we are and what we need to do. So we look at that as being a negative, but if you look through Paul's life, that he gets reconciled with him later on, and it really becomes a positive even later. But this is, here's that crisis event. Here's where you get in a conflict with the pastor next to you, or you get in a conflict with the church elder board, and something causes something to happen at this time. So phase 4 is life maturing. So there's a conference in Jerusalem on AD 49, and the whole issue around circumcision happens. So there's this crisis, and there's this. Paul ends up confronting Peter, and there's the challenges there. You wonder if, Paul probably wouldn't have been able to deal with the circumcision issue back here. He didn't have the life maturity. He didn't have sort of the miles underneath his ministry to be able to deal so succinctly and so prophetically that he did with this situation in AD 49. Paul and Barnabas then split up, and Paul meets Timothy. We just read some of Timothy. Important time in Paul's life. He begins a second missionary journey, which lasts AD 49 to 52. He starts his church planting, and all throughout Asia Minor. He writes Thessalonians and Galatians. In Antioch, he again confronts Peter and rebukes Peter. He has his third missionary journey, and he writes Corinthians and Romans. In the boundary event, he's arrested in Jerusalem in AD 58. So we see there's a maturity that begins to develop in Paul's life. He's handling crises differently. He's writing these seminal books in the New Testament that we're really looking back to. He meets Peter and has a very significant mentoring relationship that's developed with Timothy, and really begins to change this young man's life and really planting churches through that ministry. And he's able to deal again with Peter, and he starts, and there's just this sense of being really happens in this formation of his life and his ministry. So phase 5 is convergence. He's sent to Caesarea and appeals directly to Caesar because of his arrest. He travels to Rome, and there's this great shipwreck story from AD 60 to 61, and he's dealing with the issue of the shipwreck, and how he handles that is so beautiful, and I doubt he could ever handle it. He might have, if the shipwreck happened back here, he probably would have swam away to freedom. But in other words, he stays here and stays under the hand of God through this time. He's a prisoner in Rome from AD 61 to 63. During this time, again, we would see this as being a dark time, a difficult time. But in the middle of this, he writes Hebrews, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, 1st and 2nd Timothy, or 1 Timothy, and Titus. What an amazing convergence of all this experience that happens here, and that God is laying all this foundation for the church during this season of his life. And the boundary event is he's set free from prison in AD 63. So phase 6, I would say, is the afterglow, where Paul does his final travels, and he visits Spain and other areas through AD 60 to 67. And then he again ends up a prisoner in Rome from 67 to 68, and writes 2 Timothy, and he's martyred in AD 68. So how do you reflect on that? Do you see the pattern that God's using in Paul's life? What are some of the things that stick out to you most here?
That Paul wrote Hebrews.
Well, okay. We can argue about that.
I think for me it's that he was all over the place. He wasn't in one spot, in one church for his whole life, and in one city, but he had short little stints.
But in the midst of that, you see the sovereignty of God at work. We see so many times we don't understand how God moves us around, but he's got this great orchestra going on, this great divine plan that we never see.
I'd say that's street cred. That's
That's true.
That's what it takes to write most of the New Testament.
It's interesting to see that Paul might have thought that his calling when he was in the first age was to persecute Christians.
Right.
Like that's his calling. And then later on, his calling might be to minister to Gentiles.
Yeah.
But if you see it this way, the ultimate calling for Paul is to write all these books.
Right.
So that it can be passed on for generations.